Hey everyone, it is time for another recitation. This time we're going over WebDB 3, and we're going to be focusing today on using multi-table queries across an already written database schema for us. So the project today is two parts. The first is just writing raw SQL queries, and we're going to continue using that books database that I had set up the other day. But this time we're actually going to get slightly more interesting results back. And then the second part is going to be writing helper functions and endpoints for an API that I set up, which, funnily enough, I wrote this last night, and I was like, what's slightly more dynamic and engaging than like schemes and stats? And I was like, oh, I know, owners and pets and species. And that's what Louise did in lecture today. So I don't know if I was, prompted from my repressed memory of that lecture, or if it was just a happy coincidence. But yeah, we're going to be doing all this again. Um, so why don't we go ahead and get started? So on the left here, I have a bash terminal up, and inside of the project, there's two database files here. In the root of the project, there's books.db3, and that's where we're going to be writing our raw SQL queries. And then inside the data folder, there are the migration, the seeds, and also the pets database for the second half of the project. So we're going to get started here by using the SQLite 3 command line client to open up our books database. If you're on Windows, you won't have this by default. You can either use the SQL Studio, or you can download this client from the SQLite website, and you won't be able to use it as a command in your terminal, but you can double-click the exe, it will open, and then you can open databases with the .open command. Okay, so we're now in our little client here, and I want to go over briefly again the steps to make this a bit more readable, because we can start doing things like I can say select star from reviews, and I have to end my command in a semicolon, otherwise it'll get mad at me. And there we go. But this isn't super readable to me. I don't know what all these things mean, so we're going to use a dot command. And that's going to be headers on. And so now when we run our queries, we see that we get at the top here the column names, which is very nice. We can also change the output with the .mode command. So we have the options of ASCII, column, CSV, HTML, insert line, list, quote, tabs, TCL. You can play around with the differences between them. I like column. I feel like that looks pretty nice. So when we run our command again, we get these in nice little columns. By default, the widths on these are fixed. We can have the width of the column adapt to whatever the size of the first item is by doing dot width and then some zeros. Every column with a width of 0 will automatically resize to the length of the first row, and it didn't do that anyway. I guess these probably have a minimum width or something like that, but still, this is a lot better than it was. I'm also going to try very hard to put some white space in between my queries here just to make it a little bit easier to parse. If I forget to do that, then please yell at me. Okay. So the first query that we want to write is to select all books with their publishers. So if we're jumping into this database for the first time, we would really want to look at its schema. And we could do that by checking out migrations if we had them, but those can also be difficult to understand if we have a series of migrations, right? We can't just check in one file and see what the schema of the database table looks like. We would have to follow through and update the schema along with those migration files. So our database clients give us a window into how things currently are. So we can use another dot command, dot tables, to list out the tables within our database. And we can use the dot schema command to view the schema of a certain table. And so I can do dot schema books, and I get this, and it's not very readable. I can do dot schema dash indent books, and now it's a little bit better. we see that books is a table that has an ID, a title, an ISBN, all of these things. And notice that at the very bottom, this is our foreign key constraint, right? The publisher ID references in the publishers table the ID column. And then we also see our onDelete and onUpdate requirements here too. Another way of looking at this, we can do pragma table info and then books. Oop. Oh, I spelled pragma wrong. Pragma. And it wants a semicolon. And now we'll get this output in our column format. But we don't get the view of this with the foreign key and uniqueness constraints. So I like my .schema. So what I want in the first query is to select all the books and include their publishers, because the books table as it stands right now doesn't have the publisher names inside of it. Those are often another table called publishers, because in the goal to keep our data normalized, right, we don't want the same string appearing for each publisher multiple times in the books table. We want the publishers to live in their own table, and then we want to use a foreign key to reference them from the books. So we can also check out the schema of the publishers table, and it's much simpler. It has an ID. It also has a string called publisher. You're going to run into this situation where like every table is going to have a column that you would naturally just want to call name, but you're going to have to rename that constantly when doing joins so that it's unique. So there's other solutions, like I could call this publisher underscore name or something like that, or I could just rename it on the join, or here I decided to call it publisher. So the command that I want is, let's first just get our books. So I'm going to get a couple pieces of info. I'm going to get the title and the year, and let's get the publisher ID. Okay. So there we selected that information from the book, but I actually want the publisher name to show up instead of the ID. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my selects. Now, if we have a unique column like title, I don't have to prefix it with books.title because it's not going to be ambiguous as to what I'm referring to, but you can do that just to be safe. Where I would need to do it is I want to get the ID here. But both my publisher and my books tables have ID columns, so I need to be clear about which one I'm selecting. So I'm going to get that. And instead of the publisher ID, I want to get from the publishers table, that publisher column. And the reason that we have to end our commands with a semicolon is it allows me to write long commands on multiple lines, which is pretty convenient. So we're selecting the books ID, the title, the year, and the publisher from books, but the books doesn't have the publisher in it, so I need to join the two rows from the tables together. So I'm going to do join with the publishers table, and I want to do that on where the publishers.id is equal to the books.publisher ID. All right, I want to do it where these two things are the same. That's the equality with which I want to join these rows together. And now I end this command in a semicolon, and we get our books table that contains the book ID, the title, the year, and then also the name of the publisher for this book. So, any questions on this one? Okay, so that's our basic join. For the next one, we want to query the reviews table, and we want the username, the rating, and the book's title, and we also only want to get positive reviews, where the rating is over 4. So let's check out the schema for the reviews table. So what we have here is each review has an ID. It also has a rating and a comment, and then we have two foreign keys. We reference both a book ID from the books table and also a user ID from the users table. So again, in order to keep our data normalized, we don't want to put the username and the book names inside this table because we have that data stored elsewhere. So we reference it with the foreign key. And then notice we also have a composite unique index, right? So we can only have a review from one user to one book ID. A user can't review a book twice. So you can do that, and that's pretty cool. So here for our query, let's select out some of our information. So I want to select for now the ID. Actually, we don't need the ID. Let's just get the user ID, the book ID, the rating, and the comment from reviews. So there we go. There's our review, but I want to replace these user ID and book IDs with the corresponding user and book. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add here from the users table, I want the username, which I haven't showed you the schema, but users table has a username in it. And I also want to get from the books table the title. And so in order to add that to this row, I need to join the row from my reviews table onto the rows from both the users table and the books table. And we can do that. We'll just do it one at a time. So first we're going to join onto the users table. I want to do that on the condition where the users.id is equal to our reviews.user_id. And then I want to do the additional join onto the books table. So I'm going to join onto the books table where we meet the condition that the books.id is equal to our reviews.bookid. Now the plurals here can get confusing because our tables, right, are named in plurals because they contain multiple books, but this specific review, right, references a single book. So this is a book ID, but this is a books.id. People have opinions about, naming tables in singular or plural forms. Ultimately, it's up to opinion. Some people think it's easier for everything to be singular because you think in terms of rows, usually, not necessarily tables, right? I am joining these tables, but I'm joining rows. So I'm talking about a specific book ID, right? Not books.id. No, I'm talking about a single book, but whatever your preference is. So now when I hit enter, we get our reviews where we have a username and we have our book title and we also have the rating and the comment. But I forgot to use my where. And it may not be entirely obvious right at the start how we handle this in the case where we have joins. But it's the same as always. Basically, right, our select gets these things out of our row. And what our join is doing is it's basically making a fake composite row for us. So instead of having from reviews, we now have this chunk of from reviews with joins on it. So if we were just getting things from reviews, we would put the where after the reviews, right? After we specified the table we're selecting from. We do the same thing here. So I'm going to get my query back with my joins in here. And then I'm going to add another line. And I'm just going to say where the reviews.rating. Again, rating is not ambiguous. I don't have to specify that it is from the reviews table, but I like being safe. I'm a belt and suspenders kind of guy. And then we're going to select rows where the reviews rating is greater than 4. And now we only get our positive reviews here. All right, any questions on this query? Okay, sounds good. Let's move on to our last query here. This is where it gets a little bit more complicated because we're going to handle a Manytomany here. And I know you saw this mainly in lecture today, but the idea is it's still pretty fundamental, like we just join tables based on conditions. It's not that bad. So I want to find all the books written by author 6, and I want to include both the book title and the author name. So if you noticed, when we look in the schema for the books, there is no author ID, right? We have a publisher ID here. And that's because each book only has a single publisher. But a book can have multiple authors. So if we want to reference a book having multiple authors, we're going to need essentially a many-to-many. We can also look at the schema for our authors table, and we'll see that this also doesn't have any ID referencing a book. Right? That's because authors can write multiple books. This is where we have this many-to-many, where a book can have multiple authors and an author can have multiple books. So what did Louise say today in lecture? The only thing a many-to-many requires is a table in between. So if we look at our tables, the table in between is named books authors. This is a common way to name these intermediary many-to-many tables, is just with the tables that they connect in between there. So let's look at the schema for books authors. It has its own ID. Louise showed that you don't have to do this. You can have a composite primary key if you want. But the important part is it has 2 foreign keys, and that's it. It has a book ID and an author ID. And this allows us to have books that have multiple authors and authors that have multiple books. Pretty neat. So what we want is to find all the books written by author 6 with the book titles and the author names. So we're going to have to do some joins here with this books author table. So I can select the author ID and the book ID from books authors, where the author ID is equal to 6. And that will show me that author 6, right, that's what we're doing, has written 2 books. Books with ID of 5 and books with ID of 6. But this is not engaging information for me. This isn't good content. So I want to get the values of both of those things in here. So we can spice up our query using some joins. So first of all, we're going to get some ambiguous columns here. Or actually, we're not. We can leave author ID and book ID the way they are. But what I also want to get is I want to get from the authors table, I want to get that author's name, and I want to get from the books table that book's title. So from here, I'm going to add my joins. First, let's do authors. I want to join on the authors table on the condition where the authors .id is equal to the author ID that we have here. And I could specify that this is our books authors author ID if I wanted to, but we're not going to have any ambiguity with that column name, so I don't need to. Then I can do my next join. I also want to join onto the books table, where our condition is going to be the books.id being equal to our book ID. And I have an extra comma here. Oops. So we're going to join onto authors, and then we are going to join onto books. And there we go. Now we get all of our books with all of the authors there. And notice that we have multiple columns here, right? For each author, they show up in multiple rows. You know, David J. Griffith, who is actually the author we are looking at in this case, he's written 2 books, so he shows up in 2 rows. Now, we might want to, when we're writing JavaScript, right, we're talking about objects, we might want to have the structure be like an object that has the author name, and then it has a subarray that contains all the books that the author has written. And at least in SQLite, there is no way to express that because we have different column types, but fundamentally the only data structure that we have is the row. There is no concept of arrays or nested rows or anything like that. We only have these like Excel spreadsheet style rows. That's it. So I would like to show Postgres does have functions that allow us to cheat and get around that, but otherwise we need to write multiple queries in order to get that kind of relationship. And time willing, I'll show you how to do that today. In order to complete this query though, I both want to get the authors and the books, but then I want my where, and I want it to be where the author ID is equal to 6. So we're just looking at Griffith's textbooks, which these are both fantastic textbooks, by the way, if you're interested in learning quantum mechanics or electrodynamics. Some of the best out there. All right, so those are our queries. Do we have any questions with them? Okay. And they will also be inside the README when I'm done today. Okay, so now we want to write our server that has the helpers and the API endpoints for the various things. The table that, the database that we're looking at today for here is defined in this migration, and we have 3 tables. We have owners, and owners have names and emails. There are pets, and pets have names and ages, but also a foreign key referencing the owner. And they also have care instructions. Let's try to make this a little bit more interesting for you all. And they also have another foreign key, and that is the species, right? I was going to talk about today, my plan was to be like, oh, I'll talk about data normalization and stuff, but Luis literally did this example with species, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much. We want to write our helpers for this, and what I want to do is I want to write endpoints for the owner, so I can get all the owners, I can get an individual owner, but I also want to get all the pets that belong to that owner and do the various CRUD operations within time willing. So let's go ahead and do that. We already have our database migrated and seeded, and I committed that into the repo just so if anyone's following along, you don't have to repeat those steps. I'm going to pop open a terminal here, and let's zoom in because I forgot to do that, and we'll put line numbers on. And I already have an index.js file ready for us. So I'm going to do yarn server and get our server up and running, and we'll start writing our helpers. So normally we would have to connect to the database. I already have a Next file set up, and I already have our db.js that uses the Next configuration to create our database connection. So I don't have very strong opinions about organization. For this project, I am going to do 1 folder per resource. So I'm going to create a folder called owners. And then in here, I'm going to create a file called ownersmodel.js. And in here, I am going to require the DB. Go up a level down into data and grab our db.js. And then we're also going to have our module.exports so that we can export any of the helper functions that we want. And for the owner, things are going to be pretty gosh dang simple. We're going to have our get, and that's just going to be returning the database of the owners, right? Owners don't have any foreign keys. We don't have to do anything fancy. We're going to have get by ID. That is going to take an ID as an argument, and we're just going to return db of owners where the ID matches. And we're also going to get the first one. And let's just do this for now. We'll do our non-reading operations later if we have time. So now I'm going to flip over, and in my owners directory, I'm going to create the endpoints for these. So I'm going to do owners router.js. I'm going to require express. And I'm actually going to one-line this. Ooh, I'm going to write my router is requiring express dot router. You can do that. And then I am going to export my router. And now I'm going to write my routes. So router.get on slash, we're going to get our rec and our res object. And what I'm going to do is I am going to call my model, which I need to import. I'm going to call that owners. And we're going to require dot slash owners model. I'm going to do owners.get. Then I should receive an array of owners. And then I'm going to do my res.status 200.json and give us the owners. I'm going to be lazy about my catches today. I'm not going to catch the 500 server errors just because I think at this point we should all feel fairly comfortable doing that. If you don't, then there's a lot of avenues for you to practice doing this. For example, you can correct my code if you want, but I'm not going to spend the time writing those. And now let's write the get by ID. I'm just going to copy and paste this because I'm a little bit lazy. We're going to add the ID here, and we're going to destructure it from our rec params, right, from our URL parameters. And then we're going to call get by ID, give it the ID as an argument, and I should receive a single owner, and I want to return that as JSON. I will do the error handling in this case, so only if the owner exists do I want to return that response. Otherwise, I want to give them a 404, and I'm just going to end this. They don't need an error message. They should know what a 404 is. Okay. So any questions with this while I just get that router hooked up into our index? Nope. Nothing. We feel good about that. That's fairly standard at this point. Oh, it looks like Levon has replied into a thread here. No, I have not yet covered using .then and helper functions. We will in just a bit, though. So I'm just setting up this endpoint here, server.use on owners. We're going to do the owners router. Okay, and let's see. I don't have Insomnia open, so let me do that real fast so that we can test these endpoints. Sometimes I have to try to launch it twice. I don't know why. There we go. Oh, thank you, Catherine. Oh, jeez. This is my handle submit of Backend is not adding things to exports, not in data. I want owners. No, in the model. Yep. So get and get by ID. I have a typo on line 2. Uh-oh. What file? Oh, this one. All right. Thank you all. I should probably pull up the terminal small at the bottom here because it would have warned me about some of those. So there we go. All right, let's make a new workspace. And let's get our owners. So that's going to be on localhost 5000/owners. Hey, bada bing, bada boom. We have our three very famous pet owners: Henry Blevins, Colonel Mustard, and Richard Feynman. You know, your standard database examples. And let's check and see if we can get an individual owner. So there we go. That's me. Let's get Richard up in here. All right. So now what I want to do is I want to move on to the slightly more interesting part of this, which is handling the pets. So what I can do is I can write my normal pet router setup with pets as a separate resource. And we can do this fairly quickly again. I'm actually just going to copy this whole file, and then I'm going to go up. I'm going to create a file called pets, sorry, a directory called pets, and I'm going to create a file called petsmodel.js. I'm going to paste this in here because this is going to be largely the same, except, oop, that was the wrong find replace. We want to replace owners with pets. Right, and this should pretty much do it. And we can do the same thing with the router. Right, I'm going to copy that one, and then I'm going to create a file called pets-router.js. I'm going to paste this in here, and I'm just going to replace all references with owner to pets. Or I guess pets singular, because I chose owner singular, so that both plural and singular ones will get replaced. And hey, that works. Right? Let's add that to our index.js, and we can do the same thing here. Copy that, replace it with pets. Now let's try to do this. Oops, someone's talking in Zoom chat. It's really hard for me to monitor Zoom chat, so if it's for me to see, please do that in Slack, because otherwise it's just hard to keep track of. So I'm going to duplicate this and make it get pets. And we're going to query the pets. And we do it, and it works. And it works perfectly fine, except that it's bad. So we've successfully gotten our array full of pets here, but it doesn't have good info in it. We have this owner ID here, and we have this species ID. And we could leave it like this, but this isn't good data. This is not data that I enjoy looking at, right? I want to know who owns this pet. I want to know what species they are. I don't know what species one is. It's not a thing that conveys meaning to me. So what we have to do is we have to modify our pets model to use joins in order to fill that data in. So I'm going to start working on this get first. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to perform a join. And this is going to be, oh man, suddenly the join syntax for this has flown out of my mind. We want to join, it would be on owners and then owners.id and then pets.ownerID, right? That should do it. Let's try this. There we go. There we go, that's worked. So now we get our owner name and we get our email. But look at what Next did for us. We no longer have pet names here. That's because both our owners have a name and our pets have a name. And this is what I alluded to earlier, which is you're going to have tons of databases, tons of tables where you feel like putting a name column in there because things have names. And you have to be careful about doing joins with them, because Next tried to do a reasonable thing, which was to choose one of the names instead of throwing an error about that column being ambiguous. But generally, whenever we use a join, we need an explicit select statement here. We have to do a select. We can leave out the select when just getting a whole database row, but there are some developers who feel rather strongly about essentially doing what is the select star when we leave that out being bad practice. We should specify the columns that we want. And when we do joins, we almost always need to do that, and it can prevent bugs by just doing it by default. I don't want to tell you that it is the correct way to do things, but it is the way that I like to do things. There's a lot of opinion about how to do this. I'm just showing you mine, so please don't take anything I say as the correct way to handle this. This is just the way that I've found that works for me. So the values that I want to get the ID of the pet, but our owners also have an ID. Now, you have situations when doing joins where if every table has its own ID, you have to be very careful about referencing it and joining it and selecting it. Some people prefer, again, a style where you would name the ID in each table after that table. So the owner would have an owner ID. The pet would have a pet ID, and so on and so forth. Luis is a big fan of just leaving them as IDs, so that's the style that I'm using now. So I want to select the pets.id. I'm just going to get all the pets info. I also want the pet's name, and I'm going to leave that as the name. I also want to get care instructions, if we have any, and then I am also going to get our species ID. Let's put a pets.care instructions on here. So now I want to get the owner information. So I want to get the owner's .name, but I don't want that to collide with the pets.name that I'm getting. So I'm actually going to rename that column using the as syntax, which I can do directly inside of this string. So I want to get owner's name as, let's just do owner name. And then, you know what, for good measure, I'm going to get the owner ID as well. So that would be in pets, so that would be pets.owner ID. So we've got this, and then I don't care about including the owner email. Let's just put it in here anyway. And right, we could leave this as being named email. It's not going to cause an issue. The column isn't going to be ambiguous, but I can choose to label that however I want here to make it a bit more clear so that we know that it is not the pet's email. It is the owner email. So now let's see what happens when we make our request. Boom. There we go. So we get the name of the pet. We also get the owner information here, and it all works out. And that's looking good, except for the fact that I've left out the species information, right? Pets.species ID. So I also need to perform another join. So to do that, same as I did the previous one. So Jay asked, do you need to use an array in your select statement? Regular SQL would let you separate it with commas, right? Yes, I believe this is just a next thing in that it prefers the select arguments inside of an array rather than with multiple arguments. We can see what happens when I remove that array. Apparently it works just fine. I guess my reference in the documentation for that uses arrays, and it can help if you're building the select items dynamically. It can be easy to build that in an array and then give that as an argument. You could always spread that array to get it into the arguments list. I just use an array here, and I'm not entirely sure if there's technical differences between them. But we're going to do another join. We're going to do a join onto the species table, and we're going to do it where the species ID is equal to the pets.species ID. I'm sorry, pets underscore, or pets.species underscore ID. Whew. And then I want to get, instead of our pet species ID, I want to get the species.species. I decided to call it that instead of name, just to make it a little bit easier on myself. And there we go. We get the all the information about our animal right here. And it turns out Zero is a dog. She's a very fluffy German Shepherd, and I love her very much. And we also have information about other animals in here. Okay, so do we have any questions with this? All right, I see Eli typing. Zero has an ID of 1. Yes, she does. Yes, and that is the pet ID. All right, that is the ID for the pet. I have the owner ID of 1. But if we look at Mowgli, That the cat Mowgli, she has a pet ID of 2, but myself, also Mowgli's owner, I still have an ID of 1. All right, I see a couple people typing.
Mind if I just ask my question?
Oh yeah, please. You're always free to unmute yourself and ask.
Sure. So I just wanted to check something. I think I did it successfully yesterday, but the you can have a join that joins on a field that you're not necessarily selecting, right?
Yes. And you'll notice I am not selecting a pets.species ID in here. I'm just using it down
Oh,
here.
cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, you don't. SQL will know what all the column names are, even if you're not asking for them in the output. So you don't have to do that. So Elvis just asked, so to be clear, we get back all pets unless we have a where, correct? Yes, right? Because when we're doing a select, it's just getting all of the rows within that table. And when we do joins, it's just adding more information onto those rows. In the joins we're doing here, when we don't specify the type of join, these are going to be inner joins by default. It's possible that that will vary by database management system, but at least within SQLite and Postgres, these are going to be inner joins. So what that means is if we have a Venn diagram, right? If we have a Venn diagram, only the items that have both sides of the join will be kept. So that's fine when we always expect there to be something on the other side of the foreign key, or to always have a foreign key. If we wanted to keep the pets coming in this output, even if they don't have an owner, then I would want to do a left join, right? Because if we think of our Venn diagram again, right, that is going to get the whole left circle. Although I think the view on the video of this is mirrored, so the whole left circle. Um, so that is going to get everything that does match across the join and everything that doesn't on the left-hand side. So this will get all of the pet rows, even if they don't have the additional information resulting in the join. So we may have pets in our database that don't have owners. Right now, all pets must have an owner, but we could leave this as a left join just to make this a little bit more flexible in case we decide to change that in the future. All right. So this was a lot, right? This was a lot of code. And now I'm staring down my get by ID. And it's like, ah, jeez. I gotta copy and paste this within here and then add my stuff onto the end, right? What should we be thinking as developers whenever we copy and paste? It should be a function, right? Instead of copying and pasting things, make it a function. But it is a function, right? Get builds this query for us and then returns the query. That's it. That's all I have to do. That's all I have to do. Right, in the video earlier in this week, I showed how to do some dynamic query building within one function. Essentially, we're allowed to keep chaining our next things on the end of a query up until we hit a dot then. At that point, we're saying, all right, I want you to send that query out to the database, and I'm going to wait here for a response back to get my data. So unless we do a dot then, it doesn't matter, where this query is. If it's in a variable, if we're getting it as the output of some function, we're allowed to keep adding stuff onto it until we do a dot then. So now instead of having to redo all that work, I can just go and I can get 0, and I get an error here because the column ID is ambiguous, right? Because I'm doing where ID is equal to ID, essentially. But since I'm doing joins, that becomes ambiguous. So I would want to specify here in the key name that I am checking the pets.id being equal to that ID. And there we go. So that's all I have to do. All right, I can reuse all of my work. Any questions with this? Okay. So now what I want to do is I want to get pets by owner. And there's a semi-infinite number of ways that I could construct both my code in order to enable me to do that and my API in order to enable me to do that. I could use it with query parameters, right? Like maybe I can get pets and then specify the owner name as being, something like this. But a very common way we're going to see this is in our database, right? Pets have a relationship to owners. Each owner has pets. So when I get the owner 3 here, very often we'll see as a sub-resource of the owners the ability for us to get the pets belonging to that owner, right? So the way that I'm going to choose to write this, and there's very, very many ways to do this, is I am going to go to my owners router, right? And I'm going to add that additional resource. Endpoint. So I want to perform a get for my specific owner, and I want to get all the pets belonging to that owner. So now what I want to do is I want to get all the pets belonging to that owner. And I can do this inside of my owner model, right? Because that's where the helper functions for my owner goes. But I could also do it within my pets model, because what I'm really interacting with is the pets table within my database. So this is where it gets a little bit, not a little bit, very, very preferency in terms of how you want to organize your code. We can add in, this is in my pets model, right? Here is the name of the file that I'm in. I'm sorry if this isn't super clear. We can make a new function and call it like get by owner ID. I'm going to put it at the bottom. Get by owner ID. And what this is going to do is it's going to take in an ID. We can basically copy and paste this, and then instead of saying where the pet's ID is equal to the ID we've been given, I want to check where the owner's ID is where we've been given. And we don't want a dot first here, right? Because owners can have multiple pets. This is a one-to-many relationship. So we use dot first in the case where we only expect a single result, right? The pet's ID is unique. The owner's ID is not unique. We could also, instead of saying the owner's .id here, we can reference the pet's .owner ID. Either one is going to work because of the nature of our join. I would say that this style is slightly preferable to me because this allows me to remain ignorant of that join. Because assuming nothing else about this get, it should return a query on the pets table. And we know that the pets has a column named owner ID. We don't necessarily know that we're doing that join. I mean, we can when we read it. It's not a big deal, but I would prefer to do it this way, just out of very slight preference. And so now, in our owner's router, we would have to import also the pets model. Because now we're not only interacting with the owner's model, but we're interacting with the pets model. So I have to go out and get the pets model. And so for my get for these pets, instead of it being owners.getById, it would be pets get by owner ID. And now instead of this being the owner, it's the pets. And I'm not going to do any 404 checking here. This is something we would have to do with our middleware or with an additional query up here to check and see that that ID was valid. I'm not being exhaustive with my error handling here because I think we've talked about that, and I'd much rather show this. Oop. What's this error we're getting? Pets.ownerID is not a function. That's because I will never remember to do this. Get by owner ID. And there we go. So now we get all the pets belonging to Richard Feynman, which is very cool. We can check out Colonel Mustard's pets. Making seed data is hard. You're going to find this out during build week, and I guess for today's project too. It's hard. So enjoy meeting Colonel Mustard's dogs, Rupert and Slingshot, which I thought of this last night. I think Slingshot is a great dog name. Never heard it before. I think it's pretty sick. Might have a dog named Slingshot in the future. Thank you, Seed Data. Um, so there's other ways we could have done this too. We could have defined a function within the owner model that imports the pets model and then uses the get function from the pets model and then does the where off of that, right? We could put that inside the owner model instead, and that way our endpoints don't have to interact with both models. It really depends on where you want that interaction. We could also rewrite this entire function within the owner's model, but I don't like rewriting functions if we're already sure that they do what we want them to do. So, there's a lot of personal preference here. Play around, see what feels comfortable to you. Try to write it every way that you can think of, and then see what feels best to you. The other advantage of that is you get practice writing more queries and endpoints and stuff like that. So, any questions with that, with our get by owner ID? No, we're feeling pretty good about that. Okay. Then I want to show you one other thing real fast, which is, let's say I go and get my owner. I want their pets. I want their pets, right? Yes, Catherine, we'll do posts right after this. I don't want to have to hit two endpoints in order to go and get their pets. I want this endpoint here, this 2, to return the pets inside of some subarray, right? I want this to have a key called pets and then the array of pets to be in there. And at least with SQLite, there is no way to do that with a single query. Unless we wanted to do our joins, get all our things, and deduplicate that information, which is not a thing you should generally want to do. So instead, what we're going to do is we are going to make use of a fun JavaScript function called promise.all. So let's go inside of our owner's model. And what we could do, right, if we wanted to get both of these things, is I could say, okay, so I want to get my owner, right? And then once I have my owner, I want to go out and I want to get all the pets that belong to that owner. So here I would have to require my pets model. I could say, all right, once I have my owner, then I want to go do my pets, get by owner ID. And I'm going to give them my owner ID. And then once I get my pets, what I want to do is I need to return this, and this would actually be a great case for then chaining. Let me actually clean this up slightly. So I would do that. So we would go, and once we have our no, this wouldn't be a great use case for then chaining because we need owner within scope. Excuse me, excuse my bumbling. So once we have the owner, right, that's what our .then signifies. Then I want to go and get my pets by the owner ID. Then once I have my pets, I want to return the owner object with another key called pets, and its value is going to be that array of pets. And so now, when I go out and get my owner, boom, all the pets are in there. And notice, this is where we get slightly in trouble from reusing that get, because the get by default adds the owner name and the owner email in there, right? I already have these here. So maybe we would rewrite this query within this file. Or maybe get could also take a second argument, right? And that is going to be an array that contains all of the values that we want to select from the pets. Ooh, fancy. Tons of ways to do this, right? I'm not here to tell you what's best. I'm here to hopefully guide you into exploring different options that you have at this point. But I'm going to leave this with the data duplication in it for now because I don't feel like fixing it. But this is messy, right? Imagine if we had multiple subarrays. Like with the books example for earlier, there's actually a couple of those many-to-manys, right? Each book has multiple authors. Each book has multiple subjects. These would all need to come in as subarrays, and I would have to keep doing .then, 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 and we get this really highly nested code. So I'm going to stop and ask if we have any questions here, and then I'm going to show you how to write this a little bit nicer. So, any questions with this? So Elvis asked, so we use then if we want to do further DB calls? Yes. Whenever we put a .then after one of our next queries, we're signifying that we want to wait until we get the response data from the database. And we don't necessarily need to do more queries with it. Maybe I want to get this owner object and I want to change all the keys so that instead of having underscores, right, they're camel cased. That's a thing that I can do. We use a .then to signify that we want to get data back from the database resulting from running our query. So generally, we do this when we want to either modify the data coming back from the database before our endpoints get access to it, or when we want to use that data to make more requests. So when we do the posts, I'll show you why we use a .then there. But here, we're using this .then because we want to go and make another query, right? Once I have this owner information, I want to go out and get the pets belonging to that owner. And then once I have those pets, I want to return an object that has pets as a subarray within here. Catherine asked, can you go over the new object again? So I can console log these. We can console log owner, and we can console log pets. And I can make this request again. And we'll see that we have two objects here. We have the owner object, which contains the owner ID, the name, and the email. And then we also have this array of pets objects. Right. What I want to do is I want to combine them. And there's a couple ways we could do this. I could say, all right, I want to take my owner object, and I want to add a key called pets, and I'm going to set that equal to the array of pets that I have, and then I can return that owner object. And that is going to work just fine, right? We get the owner, and then we get the array of pets that they have. And this is honestly a smidge more efficient because we're just modifying the owner object that we have. What I did here was I used our spread syntax, right? This is how we would do it in the React, the immutable style, where I'm making a copy of the owner object by spreading its keys and values into this new object, right? These new curly braces. And then I'm adding a key called pets, and I'm setting its value equal to the array of pets that we got from the database. So either of these are good. This is actually a little bit more efficient because we don't have to worry about immutability here. Local mutation is honestly fine and totally acceptable. It's when you're passing things around and you mutate them where mutation can get confusing and hard to reason about. Did that answer your question, Catherine?
Yeah, Henry, what was the thing you just mentioned about mutation? When is it significant and when does it not matter?
So that's kind of a tangent. Mutation is fine. It can make things hard to reason about. For example, when you pass an object into a function and then it modifies that object and gives it back to you, or you pass that object into a function and then it does some asynchronous call and then it modifies it when that call is finished. So you can get in situations where you're not entirely sure what parts of your program have access to your data, and if they're making modifications to it and when they are. That's when mutation can get hard to reason about. And that's why in React we avoid mutation very, very strongly, right? We only use these immutable um, uh, values for our state. And whenever we want to change them, we call like a set state function. We don't, push or add keys or anything like that. We always create new copies with this stuff added on. But this owner object, right? I have it right here, and then I'm returning it. So I could do the immutable style where I make a copy of owner and I add pets to it. And that's all fine and dandy. And there's nothing really wrong with that other than a slightly less performant piece of code. But I have my owner object here. I'm the only person that has access to it. I can add a new key to it and then return it. And no one will be any wiser about what's happened. That's what I mean by local mutation, right? We have this thing. This function, it's local to this function. We can mutate it. It's very clear that this mutation is happening at this exact point in time, and then we return it, and people can go on their merry way with it. And they won't have any idea that either version of adding the pets to it has happened. And mutation is going to be slightly faster, to add a single key to that object than to copy that object and add a key to it. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I guess we have to do immutability with React because React reacts to state changes, right? And if
Yeah.
you modify, or mutate an object, that doesn't trigger a state change.
Yeah, there are both technical and philosophical reasons why we use immutability within React, but we can use immutability, as a programming tool in lots of places, but it's not always necessary. We don't always necessarily benefit from it. Like in this case, there's no reason to use the immutable version because I'm fine mutating this thing because I'm the only person that's ever gonna, see that mutation happen. So local mutation is fine, but global mutation is, okay. So this is what we have when we're chaining these dot thens, and they work, but if I wanted to keep doing more of these things, then our code would continually nest, and that's going to get annoying. So we have a function in JavaScript called promise.all, and what it allows us to do, if the Google page will ever load, is to give it an array of promises, and it will combine them up into one big old promise, and we can do a dot then off of that, and then it will give us as an argument an array full of all of the resolved promise values. So it scales, on a single line as opposed to with this constant nested state of dot thens. So to rewrite this using the promise.all style, I would do promise.all, and then I would give it an array of all the promises that I have, which is going to be my first query, DB of owners, where blah, 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 blah. And I'm going to make this a little bit more readable by doing const owner query is equal to this. And so I'm going to say inside my promised all, I want to wait until the owner query has resolved. And then I also want to wait until the pets.getBy owner ID query has resolved, right? Because those are both promises. And then when those are finished, I'm going to receive as an argument, as an array, the owner information, and then also the pets information. It's basically going to combine those promises for me. And now I can add the pets to the owner object and then return that owner object. So no nested thens for me. I'm just going to do all these queries at once, and technically they're still going to happen sequentially because JavaScript is single-threaded. But I can act like I'm doing these both at the same time, and then I can get the values when all of them are done. So a little bit more cleaner here, especially when we have a lot of promises that we're waiting on. And I don't know why I'm doing this in such a tiny window. I apologize for that. So those are the two styles. promise.all, little bit cleaner. Gonna work in essentially the same way. You know, we're gonna see the same results here, but a little bit better in terms of our readability. So, any questions with that? All right, let's do our posts real fast. So I'm going to do the owner post first because that's just going to be a little bit simpler for me. So I'm going to do a router.post on the root endpoint, get rec and res, and here we would want to make our call to owners.insert, and then we would grab the values that we want out of our request body, which for the owner, that's just going to be a name and an email. And this is one of the other reasons why I really like doing this. Right, so I've talked about not getting errors when someone tries to give us too much information. If we just toss the rec body in there, someone could try to give us the value of the ID. And SQLite will take that, and it will insert it with the value that they gave us for the primary key. And I don't want to do that. I want to use my auto-incrementing thing. So that's another great case for, you know, discarding the data that we don't want out of the request body. And so then I would give this to the insert function that I haven't written yet. Now, this is where I have to decide how I want my insert function to work. Because when we do the insert operation onto our database, what that query returns is an array containing the ID of the newly inserted row. And I can handle that here, right? I could do my .then, I could wait until this insert finishes, and then I can get the ID, and then I can go out and do whatever I want with that ID. But when we write our model file, part of the goal is to abstract the way that the database works from our endpoints, right? This router file shouldn't really understand what's going on. It shouldn't even know that we're using a SQL database and not MongoDB or something else, or we might use a different SQL client, or something different might happen when we insert. I don't know. It's not my concern. I just want to do an insert, and then when it's finished, usually what I want to do is I want to send that information back to the user, the owner that they just inserted. Right? So that's why we use the .then in those queries, because I'm going to write the function insert, and it is going to take an owner object, and we're going to do on the owner's table the insert operation. And I'm going to give it the owner object. And I'm also, Luis talked about this, I'm going to give it this second argument called ID, which tells the database, hey, when you do this operation, please give me the ID back. SQL does not support the returning bit of information. It won't throw an error, it'll give you a warning. But if you don't do this while working with Postgres, it will send you back an object with some crazy information there that you are not interested in. So just to be safe, I'm going to put that ID in there. And I could leave it like this, and this would require my endpoint to handle that ID in the way that it chooses. But when I write this insert function, I am not just interested in translating this function into the appropriate data call. I'm interested in creating an interface to this database for my router, right? When I insert something, generally what I want to do is I want to put that information in the database and then see what it was. So that's why I'm going to put this .then here. What this .then represents is saying, okay, run the insert operation. And then when it's done, I'm going to get the ID from that operation. And then I'm going to call getById with that ID. So this is, again, that format. We're getting the data back from the database, right? We're saying, please run the insert. And then when I get the ID back, I want to actually go out and run another query. I want to get that newly inserted user in the database. That's why some of our helper functions have .thens, because we want to do additional things with whatever the database gives back to us. Now, it's important to note in my pets model, I use this get here. If I were to put a .then at the end of this get, suddenly I would not be allowed to add additional methods to that query. Once I do the .then, I'm saying, done writing the query. I'm going to wait until you actually send it to the database and then give me the data back. So I can't modify the query after a .then. So we have to be careful about which queries get .thens, and we might want to abstract this into a helper function that we don't export, that we just use inside this file as a function that builds the query, and then each function is able to use it and do the .thens on it and do whatever we need. Yeah, so we have our insert. I want to get that ID back from the insert operation, and then I want to actually get that user. I'm not going to forget to export this. Ha ha ha. I win. And now inside of my post, I don't have to be concerned about the implementation of the database and the fact that it returns an ID and not that row. So I can just expect to get back the owner object. And then I can send that to the user. So let's duplicate this. Post owner. Change this to a post. And we'll make sure I don't have any bugs in here. Name. What's a good name? What's a good name? Someone please tell me a good name. Freddie Mercury. Is it with a Y or IE? Does anyone know? IE. Okay, I thought it was. All right, let's see if this works. Hey, bada bing, bada boom. What's up? And notice that Freddie does not have any pets yet. All right, cool. All right, and we can do a similar thing, right, for pets. We would just require more information. Whoa. Yo, what's up, Slack? Uh-oh. My Slack just restarted. Okay, I can't see anything that you all are typing in there, so I'm just flying blind for a minute. So we can do a similar thing for the pets. Another consideration for handling the posting pets, right, is I can get the pets belonging to an owner, and all right, Slack is back. And the nice thing about this is that we're encoding into the URL the information about the owner ID. Separately, if I were to put a post on this endpoint, then I would need to encode the owner ID into the request body. And so it's really your choice on how you want the interface into your API to be. You could do it in either location. In either case, you are going to need to insert that pet into the database with an owner ID. You're just choosing where you want to get it, from the request body or from the URL parameters. It's your pick. I think I have enough time to do one way. Which way would you all like to see? It being the sub-resource off owners? Okay, yeah. We'll do it that way. And this is not an officially better way of doing it. This is just one way of doing this, right? So we'll do our router.post onto the owner's router at the /ID in pets. So now this ID is going to be the owner ID. And I can choose to rename this into a better variable by doing it like this. Right? That's how I rename things when destructuring objects. I can also just rename this here. There's nothing special about these names. I can make them whatever I want as long as they don't have spaces in them. So I'm going to do it that way. Just to to show you you can. And so then the idea is we're going to call pets.insert, and we're going to give it an object for our pets. And so we're going to get most of that information out of the request body. And that's going to be a name. That is going to be care instructions. That is going to be species ID, right? We're still going to need the species ID. I don't want to even think about trying to put both those things in the URL. That would be a bad way to do it, right? The pet belongs to the owner. We could also do this as a sub-resource of species, but I don't want to put both of those in the URL. That does not make sense in the linear hierarchy that the URL represents. Do I need any other information for the pet? Let me look at the database model, because I don't remember. So pets was name, age, which I think I forgot inside of my select with the get. Oops, you got to be careful with that. Okay, yeah, so that's it. And so then now with insert, we need to send it the pet object, which is going to have our name, our care instructions, our species ID, and the age, but it also needs the owner ID. And notice in the way that I've done this destructuring and then the recreation of this object, owner ID is just a variable. It doesn't matter that I got it from these params or from this body, right? Either way, it's just a variable that contains the information. And I'm just choosing where I want the user who's sending the request to the server to provide me that information. There's a slight difference. When we get it out of the URL here, it's a string, right? Our URLs are strings. They can contain characters that are numbers, but they are not actually integers. SQLite and a lot of other databases are going to handle that just fine for us. But I want to be careful, and I'm just going to encode that as a number. And it's slightly flown off my screen here, but I'm just adding a key called owner ID, and I'm making it a number. You can also use parseInt, but you have to specify the base that the number is in, which is 10, because it is a base 10 number, because that's how cool numbers are. All right. So now I actually have to write pets.insert, and pets.insert is going to work the same either way, right? It's just going to receive this pets object. It does not care how it is formatted, how we actually got that data. It's going to care how it's formatted. It doesn't care how we got the data into that format, rather. So I want to call on the pets table, dot insert. I'm going to give it that pets object, and I'm going to ask it to return the ID. Again, SQLite does that anyway. We need this for Postgres. And then I want to wait until that insert is finished. I'm going to get that ID out of the array, and then I am going to call getById with that pet ID. And so now I need to add this to my exports here. And notice I'm again leveraging the fact that I have written getById, and that does all the good things. I'm also going to add the age in here because I forgot it earlier. And notice that's the other nice thing, right? Where we get the pet information is localized to a single function. So I'm able to add the pets.age here, and suddenly that is now updated on everything that ultimately shows the pet information because it all goes through this one function. So that's pretty cool. And now let's try to post ourselves a new pet. Let's do post pet for owner. And that's going to be a post. We're going to be at localhost 5000 /owners / let's give Freddie Mercury a pet, right? He should be at 4. And we're going to hit that pets endpoint on there, and then we're going to send it a JSON body, and we're going to need a name, which I will let you all come up with. We're going to need an age, which is going to be 2. It's going to be an infant. We're going to need a species ID. 1 is cat, 2 is dog. I'll choose that based on the name. 3 is also parrot, but if you want a parrot, we can do a parrot. What other information do we need? Because I'm constantly forgetting that. We need care instructions, but that's nullable, so we don't actually need that. We don't need to send the owner ID because that is in our URL. So I think we should be good here. All right. Need a name for the pet. Oh, per kitty. Mercury. That's good. I.e. to be respectful. And then that will be a cat. Oh, I hate it when it does that. I've never wanted it to do that even one time. And there we go. We get per kitty Mercury. Has all the good stuff. Is assigned to Freddie Mercury. And everything is right in the world. And I can go. And I can get Freddie Mercury. And boom. Pet shows up. Okay, so Elvis, I did see your question about Cascade, and Catherine just asked, when you have multiple tables with foreign keys, how can we make it easier for the front end so they can just send inputs and not IDs? What you would have to do is you would have to still insert everything with foreign keys, but you could make a where request first to check and see, like we could have a species helper function. I'll just put it in the pets model for now. Species ID, and it will expect a species name. And what this will do is it will return DB on the species table where the species is equal to the species name. We just want to get the first occurrence of this. Then, once I get that species object, let me format this a little bit nicer. Once I get that species object, if it exists, I want to return the ID. Otherwise, I will return null. And so you can check that. And then that'll work. So then Elvis asked, can we see the cascade thing again? I didn't quite get it during lecture. I know time is tight. So we can just look in the model here. I won't actually implement a delete. But basically what this is saying is this pet is owned by an owner. So what happens when we delete the owner? There's a couple things we can do. We can say on delete, right? If we try to delete the owner, I can say that's not allowed. If an owner has pets, we cannot remove them from the system. Or we can say cascade, which means when we delete the owner, also get rid of all their pets, right? If this was a daycare and we're moving the owner from our system, we also don't need to keep track of their pets anymore. Or this could be a registry, right? And maybe this owner had to give up this pet. There is also an option to set it this foreign key to be null. Oh, this would require it to be nullable, and I'm not sure that null is the actual word there. On delete or SQL on delete. There we go. I have searched this before. Haha. What is it's set null. There's also set default, which will set it to the default table if the column has one. Same thing with on update. What if we change the primary key that the owner was associated with? Cascade is just going to change the foreign key as well. So if the owner's primary key changes for any reason, this pet will now point towards that new primary key. We have the same options as we do with on delete. We can say, no, that's not allowed, or set it to null, or do whatever we want. But that is what that refers to, is what happens when the data that this references changes. Can we do an update? I don't want to eat too much afternoon time. If you want to go, you can go. We can do an update real quick, though. Would you like to see an update on an owner or a pet? Thanks. Do we have to use Cascade on the other tables, like the owner table? No. Cascade goes where the foreign key goes. Cascade goes where the foreign key goes, because we want to describe what we want to happen to this foreign key, right? When we delete the owner, we could have different tables that reference that owner, some of which would be fine getting deleted, other of which, no. Like if we delete the owner, yes, we always want to delete the credit card associated with them. But, you know, if they have pets in the system, maybe, you know, that just means the pets don't have an owner anymore and we still need to keep track of them. So we would have on delete in the payment information table, and we would have set null within the pets table. So we always do that where the foreign key resides, because we want to decide what to do with that row. We already know we tried to delete the parent row. All right, and I see Jay typing. I'm going to start writing the owner update. Well, again, it's preference. We could, if we wanted to update a pet, right, do something like this. I wouldn't recommend this because the pet ID isn't inherently related to the owner ID, right? So it would be a little bit more random. I would prefer to do that on the actual pets resource endpoint. Yeah. Okay. So let's do that real quick. Let's go into the owner's router and let's write the put real fast. So here, I'm going to have this be a put on the owner. We're going to get the ID here. And then I'm also going to get the owner information, which is a name and an email. And we're going to get that out of the request body. And then I will do the update. Update always needs it always needs both the ID and the fields we want to update. It's very common to format this as it receiving the ID and then the update object. That's not required, but people goof it up all the time and switch the order and forget to give one or the other, so just try to be consistent there. Then we'll get the owner object. If it exists, return 200, otherwise we'll return a 404. Again, I'm going to abstract how this database works, right? I'm going to put a .then within my helper function that checks and sees if, you know, that existed on the update. So let's go into the owner's model, and I'm going to write a function called update. It's going to take the ID as the first argument, the owner changes as the second. This is JavaScript, so I should actually be running it like this. And then I'm going to return db owners dot update. This is going to take the owner changes, and I want to only update the rows where the ID matches the one that we were given. And then I'm going to get the value that this returns. This is going to tell me the number of rows it was updated. So if it did update, right, if it was updated, then I want to do get by ID and go ahead and get the owner information. Otherwise, I'm going to return null. So this is a case where we want the .then, right? I want to interact with the results of the database operation here and then do things based on that. So hypothetically, this should work. Let's duplicate this. Put owner. I know it's kind of an oxy, or just repeated to put owner and then set that to be put, but and let's change me and let's make my email some nonsense. I didn't. Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. Very kind to me. Okay. So now we're going to update me, and boom, that works. Get the updated information. Because I'm using the get by ID function, it automatically sends me back these pets. Maybe we don't want that. Right? Maybe if they're just updating the owner information, right? They're just updating their name and email. They don't need the pet's information. We don't have to bombard them with all the information at all the time. So again, there's tons of decisions to be made when designing this API. So do what you like, experiment with different ones, see what's up. Because encoding this into the get by ID function gives us a lot of power, but I don't always want these pets. So maybe we have another function. Maybe we can pass an argument to that function that flips that behavior on and off. Who knows? Okay, well, I think that brings us to, oh, Jay just has a question. We get back different things from the database based on the function. Delete gives us back a count, post gives us an ID. Are these just facts of SQL, or are we defining that return value somewhere? These are facts of SQL. Some databases can send you different information back on the operations, and in raw SQL, this looks something like, insert into owners our values, and that's going to be, some stuff. And then there is a returning thing, and we can specify something that we want to be returned there. And with Postgres, it's going to return some crazy stuff with like connection information in it by default, I believe. So we want to specify that we want the ID of the inserted row back. And that is a database by database thing. SQLite does the default, which is usually we want that ID, we want those counts. That's kind of the valuable information out of that operation. But depending on the database you're working with, you may be able to choose the kind of value that you want via this returning keyword, which is the second argument to insert or delete, or not delete, but potentially other functions as well. So you can look into that. There's a ton of SQL stuff that we don't have time to touch on. I'd recommend reading through the entire Next documentation, and then also just reading through the SQLite documentation and the Postgres documentation. Postgres documentation is huge, but like it will tell you exactly what you're allowed to do and exactly what you're allowed to get back. And it's not going to be fun, but hey, we wouldn't get paid the big bucks if it was fun and easy, now would we? All right. Any final questions before we wrap this up? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for coming. I had a really good time. I really enjoy this, and I will see you later. Bye, everyone.